There's a town in the top end of Australia, about 40 kilometres southeast of Darwin, with one of the best names of any town anywhere. It's called Humpty Doo. It's a small place out in the flat tropical scrub of the Northern Territory where the year splits into the dry season and the wet brings a heat that sits on everything and storms that build all afternoon and break in the evening. It's the kind of place people move to for cheap rent and space and quiet. Cattle country, hobby farms, share houses on big blocks of land. On one of those blocks at 90 McMinn's Drive, there was a small blue house. In the first months of 1998, that house was rented by a group of young adults, a rotating share house of the kind you find all over rural Australia. The two most often named are a young couple, Andrew and Kirsty Agius, who'd moved in that January with their baby daughter, Jasmine. There were others coming and going. It was an ordinary household, working people, young, not wealthy, not famous, not, by any account anyone has ever given, the sort of people looking to invent a ghost. And then things started falling out of the air. Not falling off shelves, not sliding off tables, falling out of the air indoors in the middle of rooms, small stones, bits of gravel, seashells appearing up near the ceiling and dropping to the floor where no stone had any business being. At first it was the kind of thing you tell yourself you imagined. A pebble on the kitchen floor, a bit of grit in the hallway. You sweep it up, you don't think about it. But it didn't stop. It got worse, and over the months that followed, the small blue house at 90 McMinn's Drive became the site of one of the most heavily witnessed poltergeist cases ever recorded in Australia, watched not just by the frightened young people who lived there, but by priests, by journalists, by television crews, and, in the end, by two of the most experienced paranormal investigators in the country, who came to the house expecting to find a trick. They didn't find one. The word poltergeist is German. It means roughly noisy ghost, and it's a good description of what the word has come to mean, because poltergeist cases are not like haunting cases. A haunting is a presence, a figure on the stairs, a cold room, a feeling of being watched. A poltergeist is physical. It throws things, it makes noise, it moves objects, breaks objects, and in the strangest cases, the ones investigators call stone-throwing cases, it produces objects, dropping stones and pebbles out of the air indoors, sometimes seemingly through solid ceilings. Stone-throwing cases are old. They turn up in records going back centuries, on every continent, described in remarkably similar terms each time. And what was happening at 90 McMinn's Drive in the first months of 1998 was a textbook one. It began, as far as anyone could later reconstruct, with the small stuff. The gravel indoors, the seashells, the pebbles on the floor. Then it escalated. Objects began to fly, not just fall. Fly across rooms on flat trajectories that didn't look like anything sliding or toppling. Drinking glasses, bottles, cutlery, knives. The residents would be in a room, and something would come off a bench or out of the air and hit a wall. There were sounds inside the walls, scratching, scrabbling, as if something were moving in the cavities. Appliances broke, and then came the words. This is one of the details that lifts the Humpty Doo case out of the ordinary, and one of the saddest. Words began to appear in the house. Some were spelled out, at one point in Scrabble tiles arranged into words nobody admitted to arranging. Some were scrawled, and among the words that came were these four: fire, skin, help, and Troy. That last one stopped the household cold, because they had a friend named Troy Radatz, who in January of that same year, just as the activity in the house was getting going, had died in a car fire only a few miles away. Whatever you believe about what was happening in the blue house, you have to sit for a moment with what it would feel like to be 20-something years old, already frightened by months of objects flying around your home, and to find the name of your dead friend spelled out among the words. The residents took it as a message. They couldn't take it as anything else. By this point, the house was frightening enough that they called in the church. A Catholic priest, Father Tom English, came to the house several times. He blessed it. He spread holy water through the rooms. He left behind a small crucifix. Another priest, named in some accounts as Father Stephen D'Souza, was visiting when, by the residents' account, a knife flew across the room at him and dropped at his feet. The blessings didn't stop it. If anything, the objects most associated with the blessings became targets. The holy water container was thrown against a wall, and the small crucifix Father Tom had left behind became one of the recurring flying objects in the house, disappearing, then crashing into a wall somewhere else again and again. Word spread, first locally, then nationally. Journalists started coming to the Blue House in Humpty Doo to see the haunting for themselves. And this is the point where the Humpty Doo case becomes genuinely unusual, because most poltergeist stories are told after the fact by the people they happen to. This one was watched in real time by outside witnesses who came in skeptical, and a striking number of them didn't leave skeptical. In April of 1998, the two best qualified of those witnesses arrived. Their names were Tony Healy and Paul Cropper. They were, and are, two of the most experienced Fortean researchers in Australia. Men who had spent years looking into exactly this kind of case, who knew the history of stone-throwing poltergeists intimately, and who knew all the ordinary ways such things get faked. They would later write the definitive book on Australian poltergeist cases with Humpty Doo at its centre. They were not naive, and they were not there to be impressed. They stayed in the house for 5 days. And over those 5 days, by their own careful account, about 30 objects fell on or around them. It's worth slowing down on what they actually described, because this is the core of the whole case, not the residents' stories, not the rumours, but what two trained skeptical investigators say they watched with their own eyes. The usual pattern, they said, was this. They'd hear a sharp whack as something hit a wall or the floor. Then they'd catch sight of the object as it ricocheted away. It happened over and over in different rooms at different times of day. A yellow light bulb fell onto the concrete patio and didn't break. One time, Paul Cropper heard a rattling sound on the tin roof, an instant before 13 pebbles landed on the kitchen floor right beside him. 13 pebbles, which, to land where they did, would have had to pass through both the metal roof and the ceiling. A skinning knife flew across a room and narrowly missed Tony Healy's ear. And then there were the two incidents that the investigators themselves said were the ones that broke them, the ones they couldn't find any way to explain. The first, Paul Cropper was sitting in a room facing the only two other people in it. Both of them were in plain sight. And a pistol cartridge dropped vertically, straight down, onto his leg. No one had thrown it. No one could have thrown it on that trajectory without him seeing. He called it almost unfakeable. The second, the crucifix again. It had vanished from wherever it had been, and then it came down onto the rear patio, landing right beside Paul, at a moment when the only other people on the property were 30 metres away in full view. That was the one, he said, that made him a near total believer. And there was a third, witnessed by Tony Healy, that's almost quiet by comparison, and somehow the most unsettling for it. He was sitting at a table with Kirsty, one of the residents. Kirsty was holding a newspaper in both hands, reading aloud from it. Reading, as it happened, a story about poltergeists, and as she read, both hands occupied, a small brass plug fell vertically out of the air and landed on the table between them. A television crew came too, and one of them, a thermal camera operator named Brendan Gowdy, filmed some of the thrown objects. He found that they showed an even spread of heat across their surfaces, no warm handprint where a person would have gripped them to throw. He said simply that he was baffled. Healy and Cropper were honest afterwards about their own bias. They wanted to believe. They knew that about themselves. But they made the point that the incidents that convinced them were the vertical drops, objects coming straight down in rooms where everyone present was visible, where there was simply no line for a hidden throw. And they pointed out that they weren't alone. By their count, all 6 of the journalists they met who'd spent time in the house came away, believing it was real. And then the other side of the story arrived, the way it always does. Because once a haunting becomes national news, it becomes national television. And in 1998, that meant the current affairs programs, the early evening shows that lived on exactly this kind of story. One of the networks, Channel 7, signed the residents to a paid exclusive. Money changed hands for the rights to the ghost. And that changes everything about how a story like this gets seen. Because the moment there's a check involved, there's a motive to keep it going, a motive to make sure the cameras got something when they came. And then a current affairs broadcast aired footage that it said showed exactly that. The footage, as it's been described, appeared to catch a reflection in a window or a pane of glass of one of the housemates throwing an object across a room, not a stone falling through a ceiling, a person throwing. That single piece of film became the spine of the hoax argument, and it has shadowed the Humpty Doo case ever since. Skeptics added the rest of the usual toolkit: sleight of hand, misdirection, objects palmed and thrown when no one was looking, even objects heated and thrown to seem strange. The story, in the skeptical telling, was a share house of young people who started with a bit of fun, found the media would pay for it, and kept it running. So which is it? There are really three ways to hold the Humpty Doo case. The first is that it was genuine, that something none of us has a good name for was moving objects in that house. The weight behind this is the testimony of Healy and Cropper, experienced, named, skeptical men who watched objects fall vertically with everyone in the room in plain sight, and a thermal operator who couldn't explain the heat, and 6 journalists who came to scoff and didn't. The weakness is the one every poltergeist case has. It has never once been captured cleanly, under controlled conditions, in a way that rules everything else out. I watched it, and I can't explain it, is a powerful thing to hear from a careful witness. It still isn't proof of how. The second is that it was a hoax from somewhere near the start. Young people, a bit of theatre, and then a television check that gave them every reason to keep the theatre going. The weight behind this is that reflection in the glass and the money. The weakness is the timing and the geometry. A lot of the activity, including the vertical drops the investigators couldn't explain, happened before any check arrived, and happened in rooms where the people who'd have had to throw the objects were sitting in plain sight, being specifically watched by men who knew every trick. And the third is the one that's probably closest to how these things really go, that it began with something genuine, something the residents truly couldn't explain, and that as the attention built and the money arrived, the case picked up exaggeration and maybe a staged moment or two for the cameras, and the ordinary embroidery that attaches itself to any story once the whole country is watching. That there was a real mystery in the Blue House, and there was also a circus, and after 28 years it's no longer fully possible to pull the two apart. The activity at 90 McMinn's Drive stopped when the residents left. That's the detail the believers and the skeptics both have to account for, and it cuts both ways. If it was a poltergeist, then, as poltergeist cases so often do, it faded when whatever fed it moved on. If it was a hoax, then of course it stopped because the people performing it had gone. The house was repaired and rented again, and the new tenants reported nothing. The Blue House went back to being a blue house. Tony Healy and Paul Cropper went on to write their book, with the stone-throwing spook of Humpty Doo on the cover. They never backed away from what they said they saw. Neither did the residents, neither did the journalists, and neither did the skeptics, who still point at the reflection in the glass and the check from Channel 7 and say that everything else followed from those two facts. Somewhere in that house, in the wet season heat of 1998, 13 pebbles came through a metal roof and a ceiling and landed on a kitchen floor. Or somebody threw them when no one was looking 30 times in 5 days, past 2 of the most watchful men in the country, and never once got caught in the act. Was it real? Was it the grief of a household that had just lost a friend to a fire, given a shape it could see and hear? Was it a share house and a television check and a very good run of luck with the timing? The investigators believed it. The cameras doubted it. The little brass plug fell on the table while Kirsty read aloud with both her hands on the paper. And the Blue House, repaired and quiet and lived in by strangers now, has never said another word about it.